In this video, we're going to work through each of the extra natural deduction practice questions that correspond to rules 12 through 18. Here's the first argument. I've put my conclusion over to the right so I don't accidentally confuse it for a premise. And now I want to prove via natural deduction that if R, then T follows from the truth of these three premises here. Now what I'm going to do first up is I'm just going to bring together not P and not Q, which I have at lines 1 and 2. So I'm going to do that to produce a conjunction of not P and not Q. And so I say I produced what I have now on line 4 using conjunction on lines 1 and 2. Now, when I see a conjunction like the one that I now have on line 4, where both conjuncts are negated atomic sentences, I automatically think that I can use De Morgan's law on it. And so that's what I'm just going to do here without thinking too far ahead about how I can get my conclusion from my premises. So I'm going to, on line 5, put a negation of P or Q, and I'm going to put in the bookkeeping part of my proof De Morgan's, DM for De Morgan's on line 4. And so now I'm in a position to see how I can get R, which is half of my conclusion up here, via modus tollens on line 3 and line 5. Because now on line 5 I have a negation of this disjunction, and I see on line 3 I have a conditional, the consequent of which is this same disjunction that I have a negation of here. So I can see that with lines 3 and line 5, I can use the rule of modus tollens to get not R. And again, that's part of what I need for my conclusion. It's not quite there. I still need to somehow turn this not R into if R then T, but I can already see how I'm going to do this. Well, if you can't already, that's okay. Note that we have a T in the conclusion, but no T in the premises. And so what I think immediately is I'm going to be able to introduce a T via the rule of addition. So on line 7, I'm going to say not R or T, because I know that if not R is true, then so is not R or T, via the rule of addition on line 6. And now I have this, I can see that I'm one step away from my conclusion because I see that this, via the rule of material implication, is going to give me my conclusion. So I put on line 8, if R, then T, the rule of material implication on 7, and that's my conclusion. Okay, question number 2. Again, I have my conclusion over here. Most of the time when I have a biconditional as one of my premises, okay, so this is a biconditional here and this is a biconditional here, I want to use the rule of material equivalence on it like straight away to break it down into more simple and more manageable components. And so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to use the rule of material equivalence on line 1, the most complicated of the biconditionals. I'm going to break that down into this. A conjunction of two conditionals. The first conjunct just says that if Q, then not R and S. The second conjunct says if not R and S, then Q. And that's exactly equivalent to this biconditional here, because a biconditional says that not only is if Q true, then this, what's on the right is true, but also if what's on the right is true, if not R and S is true, then Q is true. Okay, so now I have that. What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to use the rule of simplification on line 4, because remember 4 is just a really complicated conjunction, and I'm going to use the rule of simplification to isolate the right conjunct. This is the right conjunct here. I'm going to get that on its own on line 5, rule of simplification on line 4. And the reason I did that is because I saw up here on line 2 I have a not Q, and I saw that if I got this conditional statement on its own, I'd be in a position to do modus tollens on it, because here I have not Q, and the consequent of this conditional is Q. So I have the negation up here of the consequent of this conditional, and that means I can use modus tollens on it to get not R and S. Modus tollens lines 2 and 5. Okay, what I'm going to do here on line 6, I'm just going to apply the rule of double negation to get rid of those 2 negation symbols. Now I have R and S. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to use the rule of simplification, I think, on this conjunction, because I notice up here my conclusion asks me to have an R. So I think, well, if I use the rule of simplification on 7, I'm just going to isolate R. So I have that ready to go for my conclusion. And I'm going to do the rule of simplification, use that rule again on line 7 to just isolate the S as well. So simplification on 7 again. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to start looking at my other biconditional. I'm going to see if I can use material equivalence on that in the same way as I did last time. Because I think if I can turn this into a conjunction like I did with the other biconditional, I can see how I might eventually use this S that I've isolated. So I'm talking and getting ahead of myself now, so let's just walk through it slowly. What I'm going to do is use material equivalence on 3 to produce this conjunction, a conjunction of 2 conditionals, if S then T and if T then S. Then I'm going to do what I did before, and I'm going to use simplification on that conjunction on line 10. I'm going to isolate this conditional, which was the left conjunct. Now I've isolated that, and I see that I can use modus ponens, because here I have S on its own, and S is now the antecedent of this conditional. So I can do modus ponens on line 9 and 11 to get T. And now I've gotten an R up here and a T down here, 2 components of my conclusion, and I can see how I can just put them together using the rule of conjunction. So conjunction on lines 9 and 12, and that's my conclusion. Okay, third question. All right, 3 premises again. What I'm looking at first up is premise number 1. It's a disjunct, but one of the disjuncts is a conjunction. Now, before I think too far ahead about how I'm going to eventually get my conclusion, I'm going to just say I can do something to my first premise. I can use the rule of distribution to turn this premise into a conjunction. And maybe that's going to be helpful for me at some point. So I turn P or Q and S into a conjunction. One of the conjuncts is P or Q. One of the conjuncts is P or S. Then what am I going to do? I'm going to simplify it and isolate just one. Oops, not that one. I'm going to isolate the left conjunct, the right conjunct, apologies. Because I know that if this conjunct and this disjunct and this disjunct are both true, necessarily just one of them is true. So simplification on line 4. Now I see on line 2, I have a negation of S. I have here P or S, so I can use the rule of disjunctive syllogism to give me P. And now I'm looking at my third premise, and this P that I've now got on line 6. And I'm thinking I can use the rule of exportation on line 3 to produce a different kind of conditional that will enable me to use modus ponens. So I'm going to use the rule of exportation on line 3 because exportation enables me to convert a conditional, the antecedent of which is a conjunction, into a conditional where the antecedent is just one of the conjuncts of the previous antecedent, which was a conjunction, and the antecedent of which is now a conditional, the antecedent of which is what was the old other conjunct. So it enables me to convert a conditional like that into a conditional like this. And that's what I do, and then I see that with line 6 and line 7, I can use the rule of modus ponens to give me if R, then Q. And this is so close to what I want. I'm going to use the rule of material implication. Oops, actually, I have done something a little bit more complicated here, but that's fine. It's going to get me the conclusion anyway. What I've done here is I've used the rule of transposition on line 8. I've reversed the order of the antecedent and the conditional. I've swapped those over and also changed their valences, negated each of them via transposition of 8. Then what am I going to do? Now I'm going to use the rule of material implication, because I know that this conditional is in fact equivalent to this disjunction. And now I see that I'm really, really close to my conclusion. What I'm going to do is just use the rule of commutativity on line 10 to change the order of the two disjuncts to give me not R or Q, which is my conclusion. And as probably many of you noticed, at line 8, I really could have just gone straight to my conclusion. I really could have just used the rule of material implication on line 8 to give me my conclusion, but I guess I took a few extra steps. We had the chance as a result to use the rule of transposition, which is cool. Question 4. All right, this time I have another biconditional. So I guess I'm going to just straight up use the rule of material equivalence on my first premise. To simplify it for me, I'm going to turn it into a conjunction, and each of the conjuncts is a conditional statement. So I've used material implication on line 1. Now, what I'm going to do again, I'm going to use simplification like I did last time. I'm going to use simplification and I'm going to isolate, simplify, and get on its own just the left-hand conjunct of line 3. And once I've done that, I think I'm ready to look at what I could do with line 2. Line 2 is just a conjunction, so I'm just going to use simplification on it. Simplification on 2 to isolate R and D. I'm going to use simplification on it as well, and I'll tell you why. I'm thinking that if I get R on its own, it's a short step away from R or T via the rule of addition, and then it's a short step away from P and S. So this is me thinking forward at this point, and I'm thinking it makes sense. Oops. So sort of bracket that, in fact. What I'm really going to do first is simplification on line 2 I got ahead of myself just then. I'm going to use simplification on line 2 to also isolate if P, then T. Now I'm going to do what I mentioned earlier. I'm going to do simplification on line 5 this time. I'm going to isolate that R here. And now I'm going to use the rule of addition on that R, addition on line 7 to get R or T, which is exactly what I want up here in order to use modus ponens. So modus ponens now I can use on line 8 and line 4 because I've now gotten onto one line the antecedent of that conditional. So I'm going to use modus ponens on line 4 and line 8 to give me P and S. Okay, now I'm remembering that I'm trying to get T, my conclusion is T, and now I'm really close to T. So I'm going to use simplification on line 9 to give me my P, which is the antecedent of the conditional I have on line 6. And if I can use modus ponens now on 6 and 10, that's going to give me T. So that's what I do. On line 11, I say modus ponens on 6 and 10. It gives me T. That's my conclusion up here. Final question. This time I have 3 premises. What am I going to do this time? Well, what strikes me as one possibility, I guess, is using De Morgan's on line 1. That just strikes me as being one opportunity to use a rule that I know really well, so I may as well do it and see what comes. So I do De Morgan's on line 1. I turn this negated conjunction into a disjunction. Okay, what can I do next? Well, one obvious thing is indicated on line 2 and 3. Line 2 is actually just a conditional. The consequent is T. Line 3 tells me not T. So I can use modus tollens on line 2 and 3 to get a negation of this antecedent. So I have on line 5, it's not the case that if Q, then S. Okay, I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the rule of material implication on this conditional that's inside the brackets. Because I'm thinking a few steps ahead, and I think I could, if I use material implication on what's inside these brackets, I can eventually get rid of the brackets altogether, and that might be helpful. So I do material implication here, and I have not, I have not, it's not the case that not Q or S. That's on line 6. Now, what can I do here? I have a disjunct of P or Q. I have a negated disjunct of not Q or S. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a not S. I'm going to use the rule of addition, and that shouldn't say line 1. That should say line 4. Because I've used the rule of addition on line 4 to turn this disjunction into one disjunct of a more complicated disjunction. Okay, and why have I done that? Well, I thought here I have a negation of a disjunction. If I add a not S to this to produce this, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the rule of associativity rather, on line 7 to produce the disjunction of not P or not Q or S. So I went from this disjunction to this disjunction by the rule of addition, and now I've turned it into this disjunction by the rule of associativity. Now, why did I do that? Because on line 6, I have a negation of this disjunction. Now I have this disjunction, so I can use the rule of disjunctive syllogism to get not P on its own. Okay, so that's helpful. What can I do now? Well, I'm going to do, pretty simply, a conjunction of what I had on line 3 with what I have on line 9. Put them together, conjunction, 9, 3. Now I'm one step away from my conclusion because I see a conjunction like that and I think I know, because I know De Morgan's law, I know how to turn that into this conclusion. This conclusion, which is the negation of a disjunction. I'm going to use De Morgan's on line 10 to give me not P or T. And that is my conclusion.